Disclaimer, this content is fictionalized recreation for entertainment and educational purposes only, not factual reporting. Viewer discretion advised.
My dear friends, welcome back to Cold Case Files. I'm Grace Thompson, and today we're investigating one of the most audacious and perfectly executed crimes in American history, the mysterious case of D.B. Cooper. This isn't just a story about a hijacking, it's a masterclass in criminal planning, a tale of astonishing bravery, or foolishness, depending on your perspective, and a disappearance so complete that it continues to challenge everything we think we know about modern investigation techniques. What makes the D.B. Cooper case fundamentally different from other unsolved mysteries is its unique combination of known facts and absolute unknowns. We know exactly what happened during those critical hours on November 24th, 1971. We have the timeline, the demands, the exchange, even the specific serial numbers of the ransom money. But the man at the center of it all, he vanished so completely that he might as well have been a ghost. And that, my friends, is what makes this case so endlessly fascinating. Our story begins on a typically gray Pacific Northwest afternoon the day before Thanksgiving in 1971. At Portland International Airport, passengers were boarding Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 bound for Seattle, a short 30-minute hop that should have been utterly routine. Among them was a man who would soon become the subject of one of the most extensive FBI investigations in history. He purchased his ticket at the counter using cash, giving the name Dan Cooper, a detail that would later become famously misinterpreted by the media as D.B. Cooper. Witnesses described him as a man in his mid-40s, about 5'10" to 6 foot tall, 170, 180 pounds, with a calm professional demeanor. He wore a black raincoat, a dark business suit, a white shirt, and a black necktie secured with a pearl tie clip. He carried a black attaché case and appeared completely ordinary, which, as we'll see, was perhaps his most brilliant disguise. In the world of criminal investigation, we often look for someone who stands out, but Cooper's genius was that he blended in perfectly. The Boeing 727 took off at 2:50 p.m. with 36 passengers and 6 crew members aboard. About 30 minutes into the flight, as the plane reached its cruising altitude over the rugged terrain between Portland and Seattle, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Thinking it was simply a passenger's phone number, something that happened surprisingly often in that era, she initially slipped it into her pocket without reading it. But Cooper leaned closer and whispered words that would change everything. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note was specific, professional, and terrifyingly matter-of-fact. It claimed Cooper was carrying explosives in his attaché case and demanded $200,000 in negotiable American currency, specifically $20 bills, and 4 parachutes. The note promised that if his demands were met, he would release the passengers safely and would then use the parachutes to escape from the aircraft. What's particularly fascinating about these demands is their precision and practicality. The $200,000 figure was significant, large enough to be life-changing, but not so large as to be impossible to quickly assemble. The request for 4 parachutes was especially clever, as it prevented authorities from giving him sabotaged equipment, since he could choose any of the 4, ensuring he wouldn't select a rigged parachute. As Flight 305 continued toward Seattle, Captain William Scott received word of the hijacking and immediately contacted Air Traffic Control and the FBI. What followed was a remarkable coordination effort between airline officials, law enforcement, and government agencies. While Cooper kept his cool inside the aircraft, on the ground a massive operation was underway. The FBI quickly assembled the ransom money, 10,000 $20 bills, each carefully photographed and their serial numbers recorded for potential tracking later. They also provided 4 parachutes, as requested, 2 primary back parachutes and 2 emergency chest parachutes, all of professional quality from a local skydiving school. The negotiation and preparation process revealed several intriguing aspects of Cooper's personality and preparation. He remained remarkably calm throughout the entire ordeal, never raising his voice or showing signs of nervousness. He was polite to the flight crew, even ordering drinks and paying for them. He specifically requested 2 bourbon and sodas, which he consumed slowly while waiting for his demands to be met. When one of the flight attendants expressed concern about the plane's danger, Cooper reportedly smiled and told her, "Don't worry, I've done this before." Whether this was a bluff or a genuine statement remains one of the many unanswered questions in this case. Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 5:39 p.m., where it was directed to an isolated section of the tarmac. The exchange was meticulously orchestrated. The money and parachutes were delivered to the aircraft, while Cooper kept all the window shades down to prevent snipers from getting a clear shot. He then allowed all the passengers to disembark, along with 2 of the flight attendants, keeping only the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant on board. This demonstrated both his humanity and his strategic thinking. He reduced potential witnesses while maintaining enough crew to operate the aircraft for his escape plan. What happened next would become the stuff of legend and the subject of countless investigations. With fresh crew and the ransom secured, Cooper ordered the plane to take off again, this time heading toward Mexico City with a refueling stop in Reno. But he had very specific instructions for how this flight should be conducted. He demanded that the plane fly at the slowest possible airspeed, around 190 knots, with the landing gear down and the wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees. He insisted the cabin remain unpressurized and that the rear stairway be lowered. These weren't random demands. They were the precise conditions needed for what he planned to do next, something that had never been attempted before in commercial aviation history. As the plane took off from Seattle into the stormy night, Cooper began preparing for his unprecedented escape. He used lengths of cord from the parachutes to tie the money bag to his body, creating a makeshift harness. Around 8 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, over the rugged terrain of southwestern Washington, Cooper did the unthinkable. He lowered the rear air stairs of the Boeing 727 and jumped into the darkness, into a stormy night with wind speeds approaching 100 miles per hour, temperatures well below freezing, and visibility near zero. He was wearing only his business suit and raincoat, carrying $200,000, and jumping into what should have been certain death. The crew in the cockpit knew something had happened when they felt a distinct bump and noticed a change in air pressure. But they had been instructed by Cooper not to leave the cockpit under any circumstances. It wasn't until they landed in Reno that authorities confirmed what they suspected. Cooper was gone. Thus began one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, spanning decades and involving thousands of potential suspects and leads. The search area covered some of the most difficult terrain in the Pacific Northwest, dense forests, deep ravines, and mountainous regions that even experienced search teams found challenging to navigate. In the days and weeks following the hijacking, the FBI launched an unprecedented investigation. Army and Air Force units combed the suspected landing area, while law enforcement agencies across the country were put on alert. The media quickly picked up the story, and D.B. Cooper, a name that resulted from a reporter's misunderstanding, became an instant folk hero to some, a dangerous criminal to others. The public was fascinated by the audacity of the crime and the mystery of the perpetrator's fate. Was he a brilliant criminal who had pulled off the perfect crime, or was he lying dead in the wilderness, his body never to be found? The first significant break in the case came in 1972, when a young boy named Brian Ingram, while on a family picnic along the Columbia River, discovered 3 packets of the ransom money, $5,800 in $20 bills, that had washed up on the riverbank. The money was positively identified through serial numbers as part of Cooper's ransom. This discovery raised numerous questions and theories. How did the money get there? Did it mean Cooper had died in the jump and his body had decomposed in the river? Or had he successfully escaped but lost some of the money in the process? The condition of the bills suggested they had been in the water for some time, but forensic analysis couldn't determine exactly how long. Over the years, the FBI investigated over 800 potential suspects, each with their own compelling stories and circumstantial evidence. Some of the most notable include Richard McCoy, a former Army veteran and experienced skydiver who pulled off a similar hijacking just months after Cooper; Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Orient employee who matched the physical description and had parachuting experience; and Jack Caufelt, a mysterious figure who claimed to have been Cooper's accomplice. Each suspect had intriguing connections to the case, but none could be definitively proven to be D.B. Cooper. The investigation also revealed fascinating details about Cooper's likely background and skills. His knowledge of the Boeing 727's specific capabilities, particularly the fact that its rear air stairs could be lowered in flight and that the aircraft could fly slowly enough for a parachute jump, suggested either aviation experience or meticulous research. His calm demeanor under pressure indicated possible military training. His choice of equipment and escape method showed practical intelligence and planning ability. Yet despite these clues, his true identity remained elusive. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the case, though it remains technically open. The agency concluded that Cooper likely did not survive the jump, pointing to the extreme conditions he faced, jumping into a stormy night with inadequate equipment and clothing into rugged wilderness. However, this conclusion hasn't stopped amateur sleuths, authors, and researchers from continuing to pursue the mystery. new theories and potential suspects continue to emerge, keeping the legend of D.B. Cooper alive more than half a century later. The cultural impact of the D.B. Cooper case has been profound. It has inspired numerous books, films, television shows, and even songs. It led to significant changes in aviation security, including the installation of reinforced cockpit doors and the screening of passengers and luggage. The case captured the public imagination because it represented the ultimate what-if story. What if someone could actually pull off the perfect crime? What if an ordinary person could outsmart the entire system and disappear without a trace? What makes the D.B. Cooper case particularly compelling from an investigative perspective is the combination of known facts and enduring mysteries. We know exactly what happened during the hijacking itself, the timeline, the demands, the exchange, the escape. But we know almost nothing about the person behind it all, who he was, why he did it, whether he survived, and if he did, what happened to him afterward. This perfect balance between knowledge and mystery is what keeps this case alive for generations. As we examine the evidence and consider the various theories, we're left with fundamental questions about crime, justice, and human nature. Was D.B. Cooper a criminal mastermind or a lucky amateur? Did he represent the ultimate failure of law enforcement or the enduring appeal of the underdog story? And perhaps most intriguingly, is it possible that he actually succeeded? That somewhere out there, an elderly man is living out his days with his secret intact, having pulled off what many consider the perfect crime. The D.B. Cooper case reminds us that sometimes the most fascinating mysteries aren't about what happened, but about who was behind them and why they remain unsolved despite our best efforts to understand. It's a story that continues to capture our imagination, because on some level, we're all fascinated by the possibility of the perfect escape, of leaving everything behind and starting anew, even if most of us would never actually attempt such a thing. The search for D.B. Cooper took investigators down many fascinating paths. One of the most compelling aspects of this case is how it evolved from a criminal investigation into a cultural phenomenon. In the years following the hijacking, the FBI received thousands of tips and leads from amateur detectives, each convinced they had solved the mystery. Some claimed to have found Cooper's parachute, others said they knew his true identity, and a few even confessed to being Cooper. The most famous of these confessions came from a man named Walter Recca, who claimed on his deathbed that he was D.B. Cooper. Recca provided detailed information about the hijacking that had never been made public, including specific details about the aircraft and the escape plan. While his story was compelling, the FBI ultimately found inconsistencies that prevented them from closing the case.
Another intriguing suspect was L.D. Cooper, who shared the same last name as the hijacker. L.D. was a Vietnam veteran with parachuting experience, and his family reported that he had behaved strangely around the time of the hijacking. They even found a rare newspaper clipping about the case among his belongings after his death. While the FBI investigated L.D. extensively, they ultimately concluded that he was not their man. The geography of the suspected landing zone also presents fascinating challenges. The area where Cooper likely landed is some of the most rugged terrain in the United States. Dense forests, steep ravines, and unpredictable weather patterns make it extremely difficult to search even with modern technology. Over the years, multiple organized searches have been conducted using everything from helicopters to ground penetration radar, but the vastness of the wilderness makes finding any evidence incredibly challenging. The ransom money itself tells another part of the story. Of the 10,000 bills, only about 6,000 have ever been accounted for. The money found by Brian Ingram in 1980 remains the only confirmed recovery of the ransom. The condition of those bills suggested they had been buried or submerged for several years, but forensic technology at the time couldn't determine exactly how long. The remaining 4,000 bills have never surfaced, which leads to intriguing questions. Did Cooper spend the money carefully over time? Did he lose it during his escape? Or is it still hidden somewhere, waiting to be found? The psychological profile of D.B. Cooper is another area of intense study. Criminal profilers have analyzed every detail of his behavior during the hijacking, from his calm demeanor to his specific demands. Most experts agree that Cooper was likely an experienced professional, possibly with military or aviation background. His knowledge of aircraft systems was too precise for an amateur, and his calm under pressure suggested previous experience in high-stress situations. Yet, despite this professional consensus, we still have no definitive answers. The legacy of D.B. Cooper extends far beyond the criminal investigation. His story has become part of American folklore, inspiring everything from songs and movies to annual conventions and fan clubs. Every year, on the anniversary of the hijacking, enthusiasts gather to discuss new theories and evidence. The case has also had a lasting impact on aviation security, leading to the implementation of measures that we now take for granted, like mandatory passenger screening and reinforced cockpit doors. In many ways, the story of D.B. Cooper is the story of modern air travel security. What began as one man's audacious plan ultimately changed how we all fly. As we look at the D.B. Cooper case today, it's clear that the mystery has taken on a life of its own. It's no longer just about what happened on November 24, 1971, but about what the case represents. The idea that one person could outsmart the entire system and disappear without a trace touches something deep in the human psyche. In a world where we're constantly monitored and tracked, the idea of complete freedom, complete disappearance, is both terrifying and exhilarating. The continued fascination with D.B. Cooper speaks to our collective desire for mystery in an increasingly transparent world. The investigation techniques used in the D.B. Cooper case also represent a fascinating time capsule of the 1970s law enforcement. Without DNA analysis, without digital surveillance, without the forensic tools we take for granted today, investigators had to rely on basic detective work and witness testimony. The case occurred at the intersection of old-fashioned police work and modern technology, and in many ways, it highlighted the limitations of both. As we consider where the case stands today, it's worth noting that advances in technology continue to offer new hope for solving this mystery. DNA analysis could potentially identify Cooper if any biological evidence survived. Genetic genealogy, the same technique that has solved numerous cold cases in recent years, could theoretically be applied to D.B. Cooper if suitable DNA samples exist. Additionally, modern satellite imagery and ground penetration radar could potentially locate evidence that previous searches missed. The challenge, of course, is that after more than 50 years, any physical evidence would be extremely degraded if it exists at all. The human elements of the D.B. Cooper case are what make it truly unforgettable. The flight attendants who showed remarkable courage in dealing with Cooper, the pilots who followed his instructions while trying to ensure everyone's safety, the investigators who dedicated years to solving the mystery, and, of course, Cooper himself, whoever he was. These are the people who bring this story to life, and who remind us that behind every great mystery are real human beings with their own fears, motivations, and stories. The D.B. Cooper case also raises profound questions about justice and closure. For the victims of the hijacking, the lack of resolution has been a lifelong burden. While no one was physically harmed during the event, the psychological impact of being involved in such a dramatic crime is significant. The flight attendants and passengers have had to live with unanswered questions for decades, wondering about the man who held them hostage and what became of him. For law enforcement, the case represents one of their greatest failures, a reminder that despite their best efforts, some mysteries remain unsolved. As we conclude our investigation into the D.B. Cooper mystery, we're left with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's exactly what makes this case so enduring. In a world where we're expecting technology to solve every mystery and science to answer every question, D.B. Cooper reminds us that sometimes the human capacity for audacity, planning, and sheer nerve can still defy all our systems and expectations. The legend of D.B. Cooper endures not because of what we know, but because of what we don't know. And in that space between knowledge and mystery, we find the enduring appeal of one man who looked at the system, decided to play by his own rules, and vanished into the night, carrying our collective imagination with him. Thank you for joining me for this deep investigation into one of America's most enduring mysteries. The case of D.B. Cooper represents more than just an unsolved crime. It represents the human fascination with the possibility of the perfect escape, the enduring power of a well-told mystery, and the simple truth that sometimes the best stories are the ones without endings. If you have any information about cold cases or unsolved mysteries, we encourage you to contact local authorities. Remember, every piece of information matters. Until next time, this is Grace Thompson for Cold Case Files, reminding you that some mysteries are worth investigating no matter how much time has passed.